This is part 3 in a 4-part series on binding, and today we're going to talk about bending the binding to the correct shape. While you can use a gas stove to boil the water to soften your binding, we like to use a hot plate because we can use that out in the shop. We bring the water to a full boil and then just immerse the celluloid binding into the boiling water. This video is being shot real time, so you'll see this binding soften here in just about 5 or 6 seconds. It gets very, very pliable and very workable. It hardens in just about as quick a time, 5 or 6 seconds, as you'll soon see. To work this binding, when I'm bending it, I use a pair of medical forceps that I can clamp onto the end of the binding and snap the forceps in place so it grips securely. And then bring the binding up into the air and just curl into a natural curl. I find this easier than trying to fit it to the body because I get nice, graceful shapes this way without any dents or bumps. As you can see here, 5 seconds or so, or 6 seconds, and this binding is cooled. And you can make some of the more gradual curves by hand here. You can just work the binding nicely between your fingers, just kind of pulling it into shape. And if you do this 5 or 6 times, the binding will pick up this new curve. You're not going to have to do any bending of any sorts to the long piece from here down to the first point. That you can just tape and glue in place. You can also use a hot hair dryer to bend your binding. You just have to be a little careful. If you keep the binding in place for a long period of time, it could either melt or worse, it could burst into flames. The celluloid could ignite that way. So I keep the binding moving, and you'll see after just a few seconds with this heat that this binding will bend rather readily. And then you can move the binding around a bit, pick up new shapes or curves. This is very good for working around the peghead area. To do the binding around our fretboards, we have this fixture that has a series of posts in it. We have 2 posts that'll help us prepare the binding around the treble side of the fretboard, and the closer posts are designed to prepare the little bend around the bass side of the fretboard. We take the hot binding and very quickly take it from the pot around the fixture and just hold it in place for 5 or 6 seconds, as you see here. And once that binding hardens, you're able to remove it from the fixture. And then, as you can see here, it just needs a very little bit of adjustment to be able to go around this part of the fretboard. To do the treble side, the same thing. This binding is hot. We pull it quickly around the post, secure it in place here, wait about 5 or 6 seconds, and when the binding is hardened, as you'll see here, it needs a little bit of adjustment, but this is pretty ready to go here to go around the treble side of the fretboard. By all means, remember to take your time. And you can make final adjustments just by your hand without using heat. Just work kind of slowly. If you bend really tight curves without heat, you might distort the binding and get it to cup. You don't want to do that. Heat will keep it from doing that. When fitting the binding to the body, remember again to make those shapes freehand in the air. It's a lot better to work that way than trying to fit the binding itself to the body or to the peghead. It's nicer to get a free-flowing curve, and then you can match that curve up to the body and make small corrections.